Well, we were talking outside because David was in the first show I produced here, which was Richard Maxwell's Cowboys and Indians, and was remarkably wonderful, as was the whole show. Mm-hmm. And I was reminiscing about the fact that for that first show, it was a 4-week rehearsal and 5-week 5-week run. And the actors were each paid a total of $186.50, and that number, I will die with that number in my head. It's so appalling.
I think I burst into tears of joy. Yeah, I remember that. That was actually a wonderful experience for me too. I mean, I had seen Rich's work at the Ontological and various other places, and I just basically. I had mutual friends. I just started stalking him, begging him to be in the shows. Yeah, I had not met you before then. You were just the very extremely cool gentleman who ran Soho Rep at the time.
Kind of you to say.
I was just looking over. I mean, you look at any sort of years that you've lived through, and you think, oh my goodness, what an era. But 98 to 2006, it's a time of much change. Mm-hmm. I'll just start at the beginning. How did you get the job?
It was sort of bizarre situation in that how did I really get it? I'm trying to. What's the non-20-minute version?
Your predecessor was Julian.
My predecessor was Julian Weber.
Right.
Through a series of circumstances and people dropping out, ended up producing a summer festival here called Summer Camp, which was a festival of new work, and I was effectively producing that, and it was basically me and the part-time business manager were the only people here with any regularity at that time. So I applied, and I ended up getting it, and I think it was at a time where the board had been through a lot with the theatre. There had been a lot of tumultuous times, as there are virtually with any small company, and actually the theatre was in the black, remarkably, but at the time I took over, I think there were 5 people, even though they weren't around very much, there were 5 people on salary, paid a total of $30,000. And so it was a year. So it was very much a situation, I think, I don't want to speak for the board, but I feel like it was like, do we close the company or do we find somebody who can sort of be here 7 days a week and give a shot? And so, and luckily I had directed one thing which was not reviewed, a Maria Irene Fornes musical, which I later restaged here, called Molly's Dream, and I'd done that on the Lower East Side at the Todo Carnada spaces. And that, even though it wasn't reviewed, it was received really well, and so, and a number of theatre people had seen it, and so the board could talk to those people. So they had some basis for thinking I might be all right at directing.
So they wanted somebody who was a director, not just a fundraiser, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing was somebody that they felt like could carry the torch for what they perceived as the vision for the company, and I think it's as I was taking the subway here today, I think it's fairly true that you could take not every show, but most shows during Julian's tenure. Obviously, I wasn't here for Marlene's and my tenure and Sarah's tenure thus far, and if you didn't know. It wouldn't be a stretch to think that could have been not every, but many of the shows could have been the choice of any 3 of those people. There is some sort of constant, there is some sort of strand that runs through that feels
Is there a way of
consistent.
Characterizing that, or do you want to get to that later? Or?
I think it's hard. I mean, I feel like one of the strengths of the company is it's weirdly niched. It does do work and works and produces work in a way that is atypical, and that's one of its great strengths, I think. And once, I mean, just on a production level, I mean, when just going back to this play, when Raphael first sent me this play a couple of years ago. I remember thinking, well, this is wonderful. I can't actually imagine anybody else. I can't imagine any larger theatre than Soho Rep producing this. If you guys want to do it, I would love to do it. That was my feeling, and I feel like there's a lot of work that falls into that, where there's a certain sort of bravery or something about the work that a large institutional theatre might shy away from, that that Soho Rep embraces and produces like at a level that that is, you know, on par, you know, just in terms of production values, it is on par with or exceeds most theatres in the city.
This sort of leads to a question I had about programming, but also about you as an artistic director. You said that Julian pointed out that you don't have experience running a theatre, but you do have in your family. Your father runs a theatre in London.
He doesn't anymore, but my dad did. I grew up in a theatre family. My dad ran the Hampstead Theatre for many years, and my mother is still a theatre director. She just had a show open last week at the RSC, a new play. So I grew up around it. Virtually did no theatre growing up. But my mother, I have dual nationality. My mother's American, and ended up coming to college in the States. And as soon as I got far enough away from my parents that they couldn't possibly see what I was doing, I found myself doing exactly the same thing.
Well, this how this leads into programming. I remember this thing that you said. My mother must have been after I got the job at Time Out, and I was belly aching to you in general, very vague general terms about, you know, timidity in programming and other nonprofit spaces. And you said something to me about how your father at Hampstead would deliberately program some sort of controversial play every few years just to sort of flush out the subscribers.
Yeah, no, at least once a year. He often did work. He was a great champion of this amazing company called The People Show, who still exist and create shows with most of their shows are created with no script, no director, and they're just like like sort of crazy, absurdist Marx Brother type thing, often lots of nudity or 100 mice on stage. But he was programming this in a theatre that was doing mostly new plays, by Mike Lee and Harold Pinter, and yes, there would be this audience that would get accustomed to a certain sort of kind of new play, and then it was like, and by their like 3-show pass, and then suddenly there was another People Show, and they would run for the hills, and it would bring new people in, and he would do that regularly. That's a great privilege to be in that position.
Well, I suppose if Soho Rep wanted to do that, they could program a retrospective of Neil Simon or play.
You know what? I said this to Rich Maxwell many years ago. I would love to see Rich do Neil Simon.
Yeah.
And I think there would be a strange, also Foreman doing Neil Simon. I think would be like,
yeah.
It would be amazing.
The Odd Couple.
It'd be amazing, and there'd be strange overlaps that you wouldn't like necessarily anticipate.
The odd Couple with lots of string and plexiglass.
Exactly.
It's linguini. Yes, you were, of course, running the theater in 2001 during 9/11. One of the theaters very close to Ground Zero. How did that? How did that, in terms of audience or in terms of morale, how did that endanger or eventually embolden the theater?
Well, we became a bit of a poster child of one of the handful of small arts organizations near 9/11, and after a while, it became, as much as it became one of those things where I was so grateful for people's concern and help and support, which was absolutely needed. We lost a huge number of, at the time, a major source of income was people renting the space, and a number of companies in the weeks after 9/11 completely pulled out for various reasons, but it was clearly connected to 9/11 in some way. And so it became this poster child for that, but luckily then, that was followed almost immediately by us producing Melissa James Gibson's Sick, which we ended up having to rehearse here because we didn't have a renter in here and we needed to save money and didn't use a rehearsal room. And that was really well received. So it was lovely to have that sort of bookend. Let's have an artistic success, be recognized as an artistic institution instead of just a geographic victim of reduced circumstances because of things.
That production was just so refreshing and perplexing and funny. It almost felt like. I mean, it's so random to sort of set trends on things, but it really felt like the beginning of maybe a turn into a type of playwriting that has really gathered steam over the last 10, maybe 15 years. I mean, Sick was 2001, of course. But this sort of
how would you characterize that?
Language-based quirky,
okay.
Which is really reductive and condescending.
No,
but this sort of theater that maybe obsesses about language, that explores the negative space, that explores silence as much as, I mean, of course, Pinter did that many decades ago, but it explores the negative space of language as well as logorrhea. I mean, these are all tricks, again, that theater has been playing with for a long time, but in a way that's perhaps not because there's no desire to necessarily shock or offend or create some sort of existential malaise in the audience. It's more of showing language systems on stage. So now I know there's a great difference between Melissa James Gibson and like Annie Baker, but I feel like there's a real connection there.
Yeah, and I would almost say that like someone somehow connected to all of that is someone like Mac Wellman, and that's like somehow they exist in not. Yeah, they're in the same universe somehow, and there's a connection there, and yeah.
Would you say that that Soho Rep is more of a playwright-based or text-based theater than say bringing in a collective with more of a movement theater aesthetic?
I mean, I think it veers. I mean, you have National
Theatre of
Oklahoma, who are amazing and actually textually extremely, inventive and bold. And while I was here, I produced a number of plays by the Flying Machine, who are basically a movement-based company, or coming out of the Lecoq tradition. So I don't know. You can,
General answer.
Yeah.
Now, about your work as a director, you said you came here having directed Molly Stream down at NADA. Can you talk to me about how you evolved as a director while running?
Well, I mean, I saw a ton of theatre growing up, and it being the 70s, and my father running a small theatre doing new plays, because it was the 70s. You could bring a 9-year-old in to see, a Harold Pinter play or a Mike Leigh play. I think if you did that today, even if the actors wouldn't be upset, I think a lot of audience members would be. So I saw a lot of strange, weird plays growing up, and my mother's plays most especially. Not for weirdness, just I saw a bunch of them. And so there was that, and then in college I read an interview between Richard Foreman and an interview with Richard Foreman, and that blew my mind. And then I began reading less his plays, but more his writing on theatre and what theatre could be, and all of that blew my mind. And so right after college, I started a company in Texas with 2 friends. Called Physical Plant, that was informed by all of that. We were definitely reading Fornes as well, and also based on that company I talked about earlier, the People Show. So we formed a company where we created works with no writer and no director, where we all did everything, where we'd rent a space, and 6 weeks later we'd put up a play, and we were all in it.
Were you? Was it a directorless collective? Or?
It was a very angry at times and contentious directorless collective, and I learned that I wanted to be a director out of doing that. I directed stuff in college, but it taught me that I wasn't really happy not doing that. And then I came here and sort of panicked for 3 years and didn't do all the things you should do, like ally yourself, assistant direct, and just try to be around great work and people making things and helping people, all the things you should do. I had a crippling sense of entitlement and was temping furiously, and then somehow worked my way into eventually being around at the Flea during its first year of operation, and then that led to me doing Molly's Dream with a bunch of those actors, mostly the actors from that company. Yes, so I had this weird thing where, in some ways, I was an artist. In a lot of ways, I was an artistic director before I was really had a freelance any kind of freelance theatre directing career, which is sort of weird.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So after '98, what were some of the? I've got your bio here. I should know, but I mean, some of the early ones that you did here were what?
Well, the first play I directed here
Mm-hmm.
was The Year of the Baby by Quincy Long, and
Sort of folk musical, right?
yeah, I get it's sort of I guess a kind of a fairy tale,
Mm-hmm.
sort of in some ways, and yeah, that was I didn't direct anything my first year as an artistic director because I was just too freaked out
Mm-hmm.
about running the place, and then that was the first thing I directed, and I had an amazing experience with that, and it was a very that was a great experience, and then I started directing, and then I think the next thing I did was Sick.
Mm-hmm.
So I've only actually directed like 15 or 16 plays. I haven't actually directed that many things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I when I was coming here tonight, I was thinking I want to not praise, but I want to talk about what I love about your work and about what you've done without having to knock other people.
Right.
Like for example, to say, I get excited when I hear that you're directing something because you have a certain style, whereas as opposed to X, Y, and Z directors who just sort of seem to attend rehearsals and talk to the designers maybe, but
Right.
but at the same time, I mean, I don't know what your style is, and I don't mean
That's actually a great compliment. Thank you. No, I mean it. I mean, I'd like to think that I try to. I mean, people say this all the time, and I say it, and it's harder to say it as you get older, I think. But I'd like to think that I get out of the way, and I think style sometimes comes out of that anyway. That there are some places you lean towards, and some things that you're most interested in that come out, but that. Fundamentally, like when I'm reading a play that I know I'm going to direct, I'm trying not to think about it much. I'm just trying to read it and let it wash over me as much as possible.
I'm not trying to visualize it or whatever.
Well, I mean that stuff will happen, and I will take notes. But I'm a big believer. I mean, I keep coming up with different ways, but one thing I've used recently that I found helpful is to take a lot of notes when I read something, and then not refer to those notes the next time I read it, and take notes again. To try and just keep being a blank slate to it as much as possible.
Sounds like reviewing. Sounds like reviewing. You take a lot of notes during the show, but then you rarely refer to them.
Right.
Yeah, because there's a huge difference stylistically between this a show like a production like The Ugly One and 4,000 Miles.
Yeah.
But I want to ask: is there a design element that you find that costume, set, lights that you particularly find yourself getting involved in terms of what you want from the designer?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm always interested. I guess I have a certain prejudice to some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that we're in a theatre somehow, that it's theatrical, that there's something to sort of just own the fact that not all the way. I feel like you can, even with something very naturalistic like 4,000 Miles, just owning the fact that you're in a theatrical space somehow and have that be part of the design, I feel like actually invites people in more than I'm not a big one. I don't know. This isn't really the same thing, but I'm not a big one for furniture sliding in on big pieces of plywood.
Sort of those magnetic things.
Well, or anything that, or anything that. I mean, I don't mind things sliding on. Actually, I guess just something that I just like being in a theater and not trying to compete with film and just coming up with a solution that just feels intrinsically like we're in this room together now, and this is happening now, and this whatever you witnessed wouldn't have been better if it had just been a film. So it's trying to find. Rich Maxwell actually said this once on the first show, and he said I tried to box myself into the best corner I can, put myself in a corner where I have to box myself out of. And I thought that was a great way of thinking about it. That trying to find what's the best corner for this play to have to box. anytime you do something, there will be restrictions, and there should be restrictions. And what are the restrictions that are most useful to something central to this play, that even if you don't know how to solve them, you have some impulse that in solving them you're going to be it will be simpatico with something that this play is trying to do.
You were talking outside about the Letta's, plastic surgery.
Yeah.
So, now, what process did you go through with that?
Right up until quite late, all the way through tech, we must have spent, I don't know, between 12 and 20 hours on the surgery. And we had a very elaborate thing that we were trying to do, which involved these screens. And these screens coming in, and then what happened? And then there was Jello, right? And then there were live electrical instruments being used.
Was the Jello splashing against the screen?
There was some of that. There was like syringes with blood in them. There were all these elements. It was terribly exciting, and it kept for me. It just kept like almost. It's like, oh, this is going to be so great. And like after a certain number of hours, it was like, it just kept almost being so great. And so it's like, I don't think this is going to be great. I think this is going to stay in almost territory. And it also felt like it was too many, like, there's so much fun in this play for me, and just knowing where and it seemed like we were suddenly working very hard. It's like, why are we working so hard? And so that seemed to be like information.
Trying to create an illusion as well.
Why are we working so hard? And it's also, since it's a play that is so embracing of it being a piece of theatre, and is a play so sort of drunkenly in love with actors and acting, that it embraces It has presenting it finding a much simpler line through it. I felt like the play in that scene, the fun of that scene, revealed itself much more simply and directly than working really hard to make this bravura set piece.
It's fascinating the way he transitions from scene to scene. I mean, we very helpfully got a script with the little press kits, and I was curious to see how he wrote in. One minute, Letta's talking to his boss. Next minute, he's talking to his wife, and it just there's just seamless transition. And I wondered if that was you or the writer.
No, it's basically a single scene.
Yeah,
he wrote it as a single scene.
And upon first, I mean, this is like, I don't know if this is interesting, but upon first reading it, were you thrown, or were you like, oh, I see what he's doing here?
No, I got the idea. Yeah. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but it made sense to me. And the way he uses doubling seemed such an ingenious way to sort of amplify the central theme of identity, and having the doubled characters all have the same name. It just seemed really. It's
like the sort of play that Ionesco's grandson would write. It's just so like the sort of the idea that society sort of rushing to a singularity, this kind of erasure of difference and all that. It's a sort of play that Soho Rep would produce, where it has obvious, I mean, if you want to call it Ionescoan or whatever, it has obvious sort of forebears stylistically, but its form is very new, very fresh. Seems.
It was really hard, and at some point after about 6.5 years, I realized this is it's also like I felt like it was like one of the greatest jobs in New York theatre, and it stopped feeling that way. And I felt like, why, if it's not feeling like one of the great jobs, then it's.
Was that too much?
Well, I mean, fundraising is a huge part of it, and I think when we started, the average production and the average cost of a show, unbelievably in that first year, or maybe not unbelievably, was $16,000, and by the time I left, we were spending about on average about 80 or 90, but we weren't increasing the staff size, and we weren't increasing the programming, and that was a choice, and I just felt like I'd taken it as far as I could sort of see where it had to go next, and I kind of, and we'd come out of this bunker mentality, and I just felt like the organization was bigger than me. I just had that feeling, and it needed someone else to come in and take it to the next step. And I just felt that way. And also, I was only on a more sort of selfish careerist level. I was almost only getting asked to do Strange New Place, and I wanted to do other things too. And I felt like unless I forced myself into a situation where that wasn't going to happen, and so there was that too. I mean, I think there were discussions during my tenure of like, well, we need a bigger, like there was some people, we need a bigger space.
Bigger space.
There was that, and that was a really interesting sort of philosophical conversation to have. But no, there was no philosophical opposition ever to moving something. It just never happened.
So you talked about getting out of the way. Is that something that you felt you did as an artistic director as well?
No. I mean, I had I was really learning how to be a producer on the job, and I certainly made mistakes. I made all, I think I made all kinds of terrible mistakes in producing and how I talk to creators, and understanding the difference. And it took me actually being produced by other people to get better at that. Like if you think of a show as being like a house, and it has to have like 4 weight-bearing supports. And then there are all kinds of ways the walls between those supports could exist. There's a million ways you could wallpaper them. They could be glass, and all kinds of things. But if those 4 pillars aren't in place, there's nothing to hang between them. And so just trying to concentrate on the pillars and identify those and just try to be sensitive to how, to the extreme vulnerability of artists just at that moment between like coming out of tech and starting to be with an audience. It's such a vulnerable time for a piece, and just understanding how to be with that and be helpful. I'd very much like to direct Shakespeare, and I did View from the Bridge a couple of years ago, and I'd like to do more Miller and Ibsen. I mean, a lot of classical things that I'm not necessarily the go-to guy for right now. So those kinds of things.
Well, one of these projects that I see connected to you or on your bio a lot is this musical adaptation of Fortress of Solitude.
Yes.
What based on the novel by Jonathan, is it Lethem? It's Lethem, right? Lethem?
I always say Latham. Jonathan Latham. I never said to his face, so I don't really know.
Lethem.
Yeah.
He's right here. What state is that in?
That I think is going. The plan is to do a first production of that sometime in the next 6 to 9 months, and we're figuring it out now in Los Angeles.
A full production, workshop production?
Yes. For public consumption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At Centre Theatre Group for them in one of their spaces called the Kirk Douglas Theatre, with their smaller space. Yeah, no, that's been music. Yes,
with music by
Michael Friedman and the book by Itamar Moses.
Ooh.
And Camille Brown, who's extraordinary, is a choreographer. Well, I mean, I love them too. I love a great piece of writing.
Mm-hmm.